History of Giants on Earth was originally slated to be a two-part series, but it has been expanded to 3 parts. Although the series is a general overview of the topic, we wanted to include more detail than what a 2-part series would afford our viewers. In Part 2, we will outline and discuss the European Giants, the Norse Giants, and the native South American Giants. We have moved the native North American Giants, the archaeological findings, and the analysis of the Smithsonian component to Part 3. In folklore from all over Europe, giants were believed to have built the remains of previous civilizations. Tales of combat with giants were common in the folklore of Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. Celtic giants also figure in Britain and Arthurian romances, perhaps as a reflection of the Nordic and Slavic mythology that arrived on the boats. Thus, it can be difficult in many circumstances to attribute a particular giant or giants to a single region or time period. The following entries can nearly all be considered as part of a Celtic and general European folklore, and then under Brythonic, Gallic, Gaelic, and Welsh subcategories. We have dedicated an entire separate section to the Norse Giants. Cormoran was one of many giants featured in Cornish folklore and derives from local traditions about St. Michael's Mount. It first appears in the chapbook versions of the Jack the Giant Killer story. Cormoran is 5.5 meters or 18 feet tall and measures about 2.75 meters or 9 feet around the waist. He lived in a cave on St. Michael's Mount, using the times of ebb tide to walk to the mainland. He regularly raided the countryside, feasting on poor souls, gentleman, lady, or child, or what on his hand he could lay, and making nothing of carrying off half a dozen oxen on his back at a time. Gog Magog was a legendary giant in Welsh and later English folklore. According to Geoffrey of Monmouth's The History of the Kings of Britain, he was a giant inhabitant of Albion, thrown off a cliff during a wrestling match with Cornelius, a companion of Brutus of Troy. Gog Magog was the last of the giants found by Brutus and his men inhabiting the land of Albion. The effigies of Gog Magog and Cornelius, used in English pageantry and later instituted as guardian statues at Guildhall in London, eventually earned the familiar names Gog and Magog. In Scottish folklore, the Fachan is a monster or giant described by John Francis Campbell in Popular Tales of the West Highlands as having a single eye in the middle of its face, a single hand protruding from its chest instead of arms, and a single leg emerging from its central axis. Campbell draws attention to the possible influence of creatures from the Arabic tradition, such as the Nesnas or Sikh, described as half of a human being and hopping about on one leg with great agility. The Fomorians are a supernatural race in Irish history. They are often portrayed as hostile and monstrous beings who come from the sea or underground. Later they were portrayed as giants and sea raiders. They are enemies of Ireland's first settlers and opponents of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the other supernatural race in Irish history. However, their relationship with the Tuatha Dé is complex, and some of their members intermarry and have children. The Fomorians have thus been likened to the Jotnar of Norse mythology. The Fomorians seem to have been gods who represent the harmful or destructive powers of nature, personifications of chaos, darkness, death, blight, and drought. The Tuatha Dé, in contrast, seem to represent the gods of growth and civilization. Balor was the tyrant warrior of the Fomorians. He is often described as a giant with a large eye that wreaks destruction when opened. He has been interpreted as a personification of drought, blight, and the scorching sun. Finn McCool is said to be the creator of the Giant's Causeway, a peculiar series of volcanic rock formations on the coast of Ireland. One day, Finn grows angry when he hears that a Scottish giant is mocking his fighting ability. He throws a rock across the Irish Sea to Scotland. The rock includes a challenge to the giant. The Scottish giant quickly throws a message back to Finn, stating that he can't take up the challenge because he can't swim to reach Ireland. Finn doesn't let the Scottish giant off so easily. He tears down great pieces of volcanic rock that lay near the coast and stands the pieces upright, making them into pillars that form a causeway that stretches from Ireland to Scotland. The giant now has to accept the challenge. He comes to Finn's house. Finn, masquerading as an 18-foot baby, bites the Scottish giant's hand and then chases him back to Scotland, flinging huge lumps of earth after him. One of the large holes he creates fills with water and becomes Lough Neagh, the largest lake in Ireland. One large lump of earth misses the giant and falls into the Irish Sea. This lump is now known as the Isle of Man. The construction of Stonehenge has at least two well-known explanations involving giants. Number one, the tale involving Merlin the wizard comes from the writer Geoffrey of Monmouth, who lived in the 12th century. According to the story, there was a battle during the 5th century in which many British nobles were killed fighting against the Saxons. The nobles were buried on the Salisbury Plain, the modern-day location of Stonehenge. The king, Areolus Ambrosius, wanted to build a memorial to honor the fallen nobles. He wanted to use a stone circle in Ireland called the Giant's Ring as the memorial. Legend had it that the giants had brought the stones to Ireland from Africa because they had magical properties. The king sent Merlin with an army to retrieve the stones from Ireland. The army prevailed in battle against the Irish but couldn't move the stones, so Merlin used his wizardry to move the stones to England. The second legend explains that Stonehenge was formed when giants who lived on the plain were suddenly turned to stone while dancing in a circle and holding hands. This story arose because the stones looked like they could be figures holding hands. In the Welsh tradition, King Arthur figured prominently as a giant slayer. He killed some of the most notable giants such as Cernunnos, Rita, and the giant of Mont Saint-Michel. But perhaps more interesting is the fact that Arthur was recounted by some as being a giant himself. In 1190, on orders of King Henry II, who had heard that the legendary King Arthur was buried there, workers began digging between two ancient pyramid-shaped pillars located at Glastonbury in Somerset. At a depth of 7 feet, they found a leaden cross which was engraved with this inscription, which translates to, "Here lies buried the renowned King Arthur in the Isle of Avalon." At 16 feet, their shovels struck a large oaken tree trunk, which had been hollowed out to serve as a coffin. Breaking the trunk coffin open, they found the skeleton of a man who once measured close to 9 feet tall. Beside him lay the remains of a woman of average height, whom the excavators took to be Arthur's queen, Guinevere. About a century later, the bones of the two were reinterred in the great church before the altar in the presence of King Edward I. In 1962 and 63, after doing some additional excavations at the gravesite, archaeologist Dr. Raleigh Radford confirmed that a prominent personage had indeed been buried there at the period in question. Guardian Rubizal is a German and Polish mountain giant of the Karkonosze Mountains, a mountain range along the border between the historical lands of Bohemia and Silesia. He is the subject of many legends in German, Polish, and Czech folklore. With good people he is friendly, teaching them medicine and giving them presents. If someone derides him, however, he exacts a severe revenge. He sometimes plays the role of a trickster in folk tales. Unexpectedly or playfully, he sends lightning and thunder, fog, rain, and snow from the mountain above, even while the sun is shining. He may take the appearance of a monk in a gray frock. He holds a stringed instrument in his hand called the storm harp and walks so heavily that the earth trembles around him. In Norse history, giants were actually essential to the creation of the Norse cosmos. The giants were among the first living beings in the Norse cosmos and played a vital role in the creation of the Norse universe. The first Norse giant, Ymir, was spawned from the primordial admixtures created by the ice of Niflheim meeting the fires of Muspelheim. Ymir then gave birth to further giants, which sprung from the sweat of his armpits. They in turn started breeding rapidly. Odin and his two brothers, Vili and Ve, were also half giant and grandsons of Ymir. Fearing the proliferation of giants, Odin and his two brothers killed Ymir. Odin and his brothers then used Ymir's body to create the Norse cosmos, using his skull to fashion the heavens and his eyebrows to make Midgard, the world of men. When Ymir was slain, his blood flooded the world, killing all but two giants, who then went on to create the new races of giants that became known as the Jotun. The most prominent race were the Frost Giants that lived in Jotunheim, the land of the giants. These giants and their world embodied chaos, contrasting with the order offered by Asgard and the Asur gods. This made them the enemies of the Asur gods, but not evil per se. The word Jotun is actually better translated as devourer, suggesting that they destroy order. Another race of Norse giants were fire giants that lived in the world of Muspelheim, a world of primordial fire. They appear to have been trapped in this world, as they only come to feature in Norse mythology with Ragnarok, when mighty earthquakes will allow them to escape their world. There is also mention of mountain giants, one of which is the traditional protector of southwestern Iceland and appears as a supporter on the coat of arms of Iceland. Another important aspect of the Norse giants is the word giant itself. When the Norman William the Conqueror seized control of England in 1066 CE, the English language became filled with French words. Among these loanwords was the Old French giant, the ancestor of the modern English word giant, which replaced the Old English Eoten. Giant referred to the giants of Greek mythology, who were a group of spiritual beings who were the enemies of the gods. The Greek ancestor of giant, in turn, was once used to translate a Hebrew word that denoted beings of enormous size in the Bible, and over time, this connotation of giant became the world's dominant meaning. Scores of Norse giants are named and described in Norse mythology, and presumably there were many more, but some are more famous than others. Here is a brief list for your reference. In March of 2015, a strange photo popped up on social media that showed what appeared to be at least two gigantic human skulls. The photo was allegedly taken in a small village in the southern Mexican state of Chiapas. It was and still is circulated as evidence of the existence of giants. Much like the Big Man Japan clip in Part 1, this is just another example of social media trolls and their clickbait. In October of 2008, the website worth1000.com had a contest for graphic artists to come up with the most convincing depictions of absurd or anomalous archaeological finds, and this was one of them. Despite these types of hoaxes, giants in South America have a very long and a very real history. Machu Pichu, Ollantaytambo, Sacsayhuaman Tiwanaku, Teotihuacán, as well as many other locations in South and Central America, are all connected with giants. When discussing giants in Central and South America, most treatments focus on the Aztecs, Inca, and Maya, and we will certainly touch on those civilizations, but we are going to begin a bit further down the rabbit hole since we are now jumping to the Western Hemisphere. The Olmecs were the first Mesoamerican civilization and laid many of the foundations for the civilizations that followed. The Olmecs flourished during Mesoamerica's formative period, dating roughly from as early as 1500 BCE to about 400 BCE, but pre-Olmec cultures had flourished since about 2500 BCE. The rabbit hole we spoke of earlier is formed by a certain school of thought by some researchers that the Olmecs were actually a race of giants. Legends and archaeological evidence indicate that the Olmecs did not stop at the edge of the ocean, but pushed on southward into Central America and the northern lands of South America. The legends in the equatorial and northern parts of the Andes recalled not only the arrival by sea of their own ancestors, but also two separate ones by giants. One arrival had occurred in ancient empire times, the other in Mohica times. Saeza de Leon described the latter thus, quote, "There arrived on the coast in boats made of reeds as big as large ships, a party of men of such size that from the knee downward their height was as great as the entire height of an ordinary man." End quote. They had metal tools with which they dug wells in the rock, but for food they raided the natives' provisions. They also violated the natives' women, for there were no women among the landing giants. According to Incan creation stories, Viracocha rose from Lake Titicaca in the time of darkness to bring forth light. He made the sun, moon, and the stars. He made mankind by breathing into stones, but his first creation were brainless giants that displeased him. So he destroyed it with a flood and made a new, better one from smaller stones. The Incas believed that theirs was the fifth age or sun. The first age was that of Viracochas, gods who were white and bearded. The second age was that of the giants. Some of them were not benevolent, and there had been conflicts between the gods and the giants. Then followed the age of primitive man, of uncultured human beings. The fourth age was the age of heroes, men who were demigods. And then there was the fifth age, the age of human kings, of whom the Incas were last in line. The Aztecs believed the Quinametzin populated the world during the previous era of the Sun of Rain. A Quinametzin stood more than 10 feet tall and weighed about 650 pounds. They were punished by the gods because they did not venerate them, and their peak civilization came to an end as a result of great calamities and as a punishment from the heavens for grave sins they had committed. The construction of the pyramid of Cholula and the city of Teotihuacán was attributed to the Quinametzin giants. They also believed that giants helped the Toltecs build their capital city of Tula. It is believed that the Nahuatl word Quinametzin had been mistranslated to mean the Old Ones. With a closer look at the etymology of the word, we find that Quinametzin almost directly translates to giant people. When we look at the Maya, we find that giants were part of the ancient Mayan religious belief system in the form of demigods named Cha'acab, who served the great god Cha'ak, and often appeared to humans as dwarves or giants. Another giant from Mayan legend is Zaypacna, who was the older brother of Cabrakan. Zaypacna had the natural-born ability to create and move mountains. Every day he would dig up earth and construct mountains, and then his brother would shake the earth and knock them down flat. By the 16th century CE, as we move up to the age of European exploration, we can find actual historical references to races of larger humanoids and claims that the Spanish encountered the remnants of tribes of giants throughout Mexico. Diego de Ordaz was a Spanish explorer and soldier who participated in the Spanish conquest. An account of his discoveries describes the remains of giants. Quote, "I wish to end this chapter with a gigantic story which, like the formidable Atlas, comes to support my claims. I found in the vault of a temple the thigh bone of a giant, worn and nearly destroyed by age. For some days I had that bone in my home. It measured 5 palms in length and its width in proportion. Those who were afterwards sent by Cortez into the mountains if the South returned, saying that they had discovered a country inhabited by giants. In proof of this claim, it is said that they brought back many ribs of the dead." End quote. In the late 16th century, a book titled The Natural and Moral History of the Indies by Jose de Acosta references giants. Quote, "When I was in Mexico in the year of our Lord 1586, they found one of those giants buried in one of our farms, which we call Jesus del Monte, of whom they brought a tooth to be seen, which, without augmenting, was as big as the fist of a man, and according to this, all the rest was proportionate, which I saw and admired at his deformed greatness." End quote. The true history of the conquest of New Spain, written by Bernal Diaz around 1570, has an entry referring to giants in chapter 78. It describes Conquistador Hernan Cortes asking local kings about the history of their kingdoms. Quote, "Our friends told us how and whence they came into this country, and how they had settled themselves there, how it came that, notwithstanding their vicinity to the Mexicans, they resembled each other so little, and lived in perpetual warfare with each other. The tradition was also handed down from their forefathers that in ancient times there lived here a race of men and women who were of immense stature with heavy bones. In order to give us a notion of the huge frame of this people, they dragged forth a bone, or rather a thigh bone, of one of those giants which was very strong and measured the length of a man of good stature. This bone was still entire from the knee to the hip joint. I measured it by my own person, and found it to be of my own length, although I am a man of considerable height. We did not doubt for an instant that this country was once inhabited by giants." End quote. The Patagonian giants were a race of people who first began to appear in early European accounts of the then little-known region and coastline of Patagonia. They were supposed to have exceeded at least double Norman human height, some accounts giving heights of 12 to 15 feet, or 3.7 to 4.6 meters, or more. Tales of these people would take a hold over European concepts of the region for some 250 years. First mention of these people came from the voyage of Ferdinand Magellan and his crew, who discovered them while exploring the coastline of South America en route to the Maluku Islands in their circumnavigation of the world in the 1520s. Antonio Picafetta, one of the expedition's few survivors and the chronicler of Magellan's expedition, wrote in his account about their encounter with natives, "twice a normal person's height." This concludes Part 2 of History of Giants on Earth. As mentioned earlier, native North American giants, the archaeological findings, and the analysis of the Smithsonian component will be covered in Part 3.